friends, welcome back to my channel. Hope you're all keeping safe and well and enjoying the summer. For me, July has been a fairly quiet month really. There's not been quite so much going on. There isn't quite so much to mention in this video, although there are still some bits and pieces I want to talk about, and I hope you find it interesting as always. And as ever, there's more information in the blog post to go with this, and none of it's sponsored or gifted. But yeah, there are a few reasons I haven't been out and about quite as much this month. One being the weather. It's been quite wet and miserable sometimes, although, you know, there's nothing to complain about compared to wildfires and things like that other parts of the world are having. Another reason is the fact that I'm preparing for my 40th birthday in August, which I'm really looking forward to. Got several things booked and planned for that. And then another reason is the fact that I've had my PIP review form to do for my personal independence payments. You'd think it's a benefit that I just get for life because my conditions are permanent, because they're genetic. They can't be cured by medical treatments. They're not going to be cured on their own. There's nothing that can be done to make them better. So, you know, it would just be simpler and easier if I just told them as and when things changed, which they will. I mean, so far they've remained stable, which is good. But at some point they're going to get worse. Then I can tell them I need more support at that point. But no, they like to ask you every few years just to kind of put a bit of pressure on you, I think, just to let you know they haven't forgotten, because they don't want to pay out unless they really have to. So I've done everything I can. You know, I've just basically rehashed all the statements I wrote last time, just, you know, rewritten them in the style of their new review questions and just sent it all off again with a bit of supporting evidence as well. I've got a letter from somebody to support me in my medical record I've put in again just to remind them that it's all permanent. So we'll see what happens. You know, it should just be simple. I should just get the same decision because I'm telling you the same information and, you know, it's all the same. But you know, we'll see. You never know with these people, but yeah, we'll see what happens. On the disability front, though, another thing that is worth mentioning is all the talk about the proposed closure of ticket offices at railway stations. That's obviously causing a lot of concern. I mean, for me, you know, I can't use ticket machines. I'm useless at those because I have to get right close to the screen to see them, and even then it takes me ages to work out, you know, how to find the stations I want and the ticket type I want and put my rail card in and all this kind of stuff. It takes ages to kind of orientate myself on each screen to find out where all the options are. So yeah, I don't like using ticket machines. I will always use a ticket office where at all possible. I mean, well, I always book in advance if I can, but if I have to buy a ticket on the day, then yes, I will book it at the ticket office. And if they go and there are just staff wandering around the station, then I've got to hunt around the station for a member of staff to help me and hope they're not busy with other people and all this kind of stuff. I mean, if I can just go through the barrier and just get on the train and then buy a ticket on the train, then yeah, that's better. But some stations have gates that you have to have a ticket to pass through, so it's not always that simple. But yeah, if I can't find a member of staff, then that's going to be pretty stressful in those situations. And some stations aren't staffed at all. I mean, even now some stations are unmanned, so that make it even worse. You know, there are definite fears from this that it could be a justification for staff cuts in the future as well. So yeah, there's a lot of concern out there, and I'll put links to the consultations in the description below, just as they are in my blog post, if you want to give feedback on that, because I think the more voices that get heard in this issue, the better, because it is concerning for a lot of people that they're kind of pulling back on the assistance that's available. There's even concerns that the whole turn up and go thing for disabled people could be kind of pushed back and you're forced to book 2 hours in advance and things like that, which is impossible. You know, in many cases you can't know when you're going to travel sometimes, so booking 2 hours ahead would be silly. But yeah, there's all that kind of thing going on. There's loads more issues than I can mention here. A lot of people have been talking about it on social media and the news and things. So yeah, if you can give your feedback to the consultation in support of all that, then that would be appreciated. But yeah, all that kind of stuff aside, let's get on to the stuff that I've been doing and enjoying. So last month I mentioned the fact that I'd done the Morphs art trail with all the sculptures of Morph, the old children's character, spread all over London, and that was really nice to do, and I hope you enjoyed looking at my blog post all about that. But 4 of those mini statues, and now a 5th one they've added since, but I didn't see it at the time, were in the Guildhall Art Gallery, which I've never been in before. So I thought I'd actually spend an afternoon there, not just to go in there and look at the statues, but to go in there and look at everything they have. And it's a really nice place. They've got a lot of lovely paintings in there. You know, you've got the Victorian Gallery when you're in there, which has got a huge painting at the back of the room that spans 2 floors to do with the Battle of Gibraltar. And it's really, really impressive, just that big painting alone. But all the paintings are beautiful in there. And that's where I started. And then I timed my arrival to go on one of the tours that they do around the place. So we went on a lovely tour. There's a lovely lady who took us around and we saw a few highlights in each of the different rooms. And then we ended up down in the amphitheatre downstairs, which had been discovered when the building was being constructed. The archaeologists uncovered it and then spent a while looking through it. So there's a representation of that downstairs. There's a lot of the original stonework down there from the Roman times when it was built. And yeah, it's just really impressive, and you get a sense of the scale. And outside the building in Guildhall Yard, there's a huge circle outside drawn on the ground to show how big it really was. Obviously the bit in the gallery probably is just a small section of it. But yeah, that's really impressive. And then as the tour had finished downstairs, that meant I was able to work my way upstairs bit by bit, going through all the different exhibition spaces along the way, which was very good. It meant I was able to see everything and not miss anything out. So there were lots of great pictures of London along the way, and there's a room dedicated to Christopher Wren, and there was a temporary exhibition with lots of huge artworks on the walls, which has since closed, but it was really nice in there. There's nice little statues and things dotted around the place too, and all sorts of bits and pieces. So it's really nice. I can definitely recommend a visit. The only disappointing thing was that they didn't have the large print guides that were stated in the access guide on their website as being available, because the poor lady at reception didn't know anything about them, and the person she rang didn't know where they would be. Otherwise, she was perfectly friendly. It wasn't her fault for not knowing the information, but it was disappointing that those guides weren't available. So, I did tell her that I would mention it online and stuff like that. So I hope that they've kind of taken it on board and they'll fix that, but I don't know if they have. Nevertheless, I was able to use the Smartify app as I went round, which allows you to hold your phone up to the artworks and it instantly recognises them using the camera and gives you information about them. Sometimes it's descriptive, sometimes it's just the context behind it, but it was useful nonetheless, and it was very, very interesting to look at some of that stuff. Didn't do it for every painting, obviously, but certainly ones that caught my eye the most. It didn't work on all of them either. Some of them are just too high up on the walls to get a good shot of them, and the light reflects a bit too much of some of them for the camera to get a really good shot. But on the whole, the Smartify app worked really well. So yeah, overall, it was a lovely visit to the gallery. Apart from the large print guides, I still enjoyed it very much. The tour was brilliant, and they just have a lot of beautiful stuff in there. So I can definitely recommend a visit to that. And then in terms of the great outdoors, I spent a couple of days walking around Greenwich Park, which is beautiful. I wanted to tick that off my walking map that I've been filling in over the past few years, and I've done so because it's not as big as some parks, but it's still pretty sizable and has some amazing views, especially that one from Observatory Hill, of course, where you're looking over at the London skyline. And yeah, it's just a beautiful place. There's lots of nice flowers in there too, and some other bits and pieces that are worth seeing. So Greenwich Park is lovely, and yeah, it was just a nice relaxing couple of days to walk around there. And then I popped down to Brighton with my aunt as well for an afternoon. We spent a nice few hours down by the seaside there. We'd gone last year as well, and we went back again now because we both like it there. She goes down there quite a lot, and I want to go down there more often. I'm definitely going to have to stay down there for a weekend, I think, and have a proper look around, because it's just got a nice atmosphere down there. We walked around some of the shopping streets, and it's just bustling with lots of people enjoying themselves, and there's lots of nice kind of murals and things on the walls that make it look nice. They've kind of made an effort to make it feel unique and welcoming, and there's some unique shops down there and that kind of thing. So it does feel like it draws you in, which is lovely. That's how it should be. So yeah, we had a little walk around those shopping streets, and then we went down to the coast and had a walk along the seafront quite a way. A bit windy that day, but we didn't mind that. It was quite refreshing. And then on the way back, we stopped off and had some chips as well, which was nice. So yeah, it was just a nice few hours by the seaside, as I say. It was nice to get away from the city for that afternoon. So then we'll move on to TV, and apart from The Last Leg that I always watch, and Secrets of the London Underground that is back for a new series, and I can highly recommend that. It's really interesting, but I'll talk more about that when the series is finished. There are a couple of sitcoms I particularly want to mention that I've watched in their entirety this month. So the first and the most important one really is Blackadder, which is, like me, celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. So yeah, that's a really funny historical sitcom that a lot of you will know. It stars Rowan Atkinson as Edmund Blackadder and Tony Robinson as his servant Baldrick, and each series is set in a different historical period, and it's just good fun. And so I've watched my entire DVD box set that I've got of it, and I've also watched a couple of shows on Gold that were celebrating the anniversary. In terms of the series one isn't great. I mean, everyone kind of acknowledges that. They were kind of a bit too ambitious. They didn't have a live audience there. The stories were a bit too complex. There were too many characters, and overall, really, the fact that Blackadder and Baldrick weren't really characterised properly, in the sense that Blackadder, despite being the one in charge of Baldrick, was actually the more feeble and stupid one, and Baldrick was a bit more intelligent, and it just didn't feel right that way, and there just wasn't the right kind of comedy there. And there were some nice bits and pieces throughout the series, and they had some impressive stars alongside them, like Brian Blessed in particular, and guest stars like Peter Cook. But on the whole, yeah, it just didn't really work. And when I rewatch the series, generally, I don't tend to watch that one quite as much. I do sometimes, I did on this occasion, but sometimes I just skip it altogether because it's not quite as great. But then when we get to series 2, the writing team changes. So instead of Richard Curtis and Rowan Atkinson, Richard Curtis is joined instead by Ben Elton, and things change remarkably from there. And series 2 is my favourite of all the 4 series, because you don't just have Blackadder and Baldrick, who now are characterised properly, with Blackadder being properly in charge and being very cynical and insulting people and scheming and things like that, and Baldrick is a bit more stupid now. Not as stupid as he later became still, but definitely heading in that direction. It's definitely the right balance between them. And there's also Percy as well, another silly servant to Blackadder. But there's also Queen Elizabeth, or Queenie, who's played by Miranda Richardson, and she is just fantastic. She's so funny. Just the way she's kind of quite bratty and childish and demanding, and yeah, it's just good fun. And then you've got Stephen Fry as Melchett and Patsy Byrne as Nursey. It's just a great central cast of 6 characters. They're a lot of fun. And then there's some great guest stars as well in that series, especially Rick Mayall as Lord Flashheart, who is just fantastic. He came into the show on the condition that he would have funnier lines than everybody else. And he did. He just blew everybody away. He really showed everyone just how much you can just steal a show in just one scene. And he had a later role as well in Series 4 too. So there's a lot of great stars in that series, a lot of great episodes. Series 3 isn't quite as good, if only because of the high bar Series 2 had set, and the cast is smaller. You've just got Hugh Laurie as the Prince Regent, accompanied by Blackadder and Baldric. There are some nice guest stars in that as well, though, with Robbie Coltrane in particular playing the guy who writes the dictionary. That's a classic episode. And then Blackadder goes fourth. I would say it's my second favourite series. It kind of goes 2, 4, 3, 1 in terms of my order of preference. But Blackadder goes fourth, is set during the war. And yeah, it's really nice. That series is really funny, and it's also got a really poignant ending, of course. So yeah, those 4 series are really good. And then there's some specials as well. You've got the Cavalier Years, which is a short charity special. You've got the Christmas Carol, which is a classic Christmas episode, which I watch most Christmases because it is good fun. And then there's Back and Forth, which I remember seeing in the Millennium Dome shortly after it opened. So those are great specials as well. And then the DVD box set has got all sorts of extras like commentaries and interviews and documentaries and things. So it's really comprehensive watching all that, really interesting insights into how the show was made. And then in terms of what Gold was showing to celebrate the anniversary, they broadcast the pilot episode in full for the first time. Obviously that was never meant to be shown on TV in the first place. It was really fascinating to watch it because there are key differences as well as similarities between that and the first series that followed. One difference is that Baldric is played by somebody else, for example. And also the relationship between Blackadder and Baldric is more similar to that in Series 2 rather than Series 1 that followed. So even though the storyline for the pilot was reused in the first series at one point, in other ways it was a bit different to the first series. So it was really interesting in terms of how the sitcom evolved and came to be. And there was also an interesting kind of documentary attached to it where Tony Robinson spoke to various people about the evolution of the show. So that was all really interesting. Then Gold also showed a 2-hour retrospective all about the show, which wasn't as interesting for me, if only because I'd watched everything on the DVD and there was a lot of repetitive stuff as a result in terms of the stories being told. You know, the interviews that they were using were different, but they were still old interviews. They hadn't filmed any new interviews with anyone involved with the show. They just grabbed a load of interviews from an old documentary they'd done and they interspersed it with lots of classic clips, and then they also padded it out to 2 hours by just talking to lots of modern comedians about why they like the show, which is common for a lot of tribute shows about old sitcoms these days. So there was nothing new in there in terms of the stories and the information, but obviously if you haven't got the DVD or if you're not familiar with Blackadder, it's actually a nice overview of the show. So yeah, it was nice that Gold gave it a nice tribute like that. And then the other sitcom I watched was Staged, which I loved watching the first 2 series of during lockdown, and I got those on DVD. And now finally they've released Series 3 on DVD as well, which was tucked away on BritBox for several months and then finally got shown on BBC One in June. So I got the DVD in July, and now I've watched all 3 series on DVD, and it's still really funny. It's nice and easy to get through as well because they're only 22 minutes each. There's only 20 episodes. And the series basically involves a group of people playing fictional versions of themselves in the show. In particular, you've got David Tennant and Michael Sheen at the heart of it, and in Series 1 they're stuck at home during lockdown, and so they're communicating with each other over video calls like friends do, talking about all sorts of random things and bemoaning the fact they haven't got work and all that kind of thing. And you know, the whole series is conducted over video calls. It's all filmed that way, and even later series use video calls heavily, but it's all very nicely edited. It's kind of nicely visualized, and there's nice little bits of scenery and other imagery put in between as well to break it up a bit, and there's a nice music score as well underlying it, which I've got the soundtrack album for from the first series. But in terms of the story, David and Michael are kind of stuck in a rut and really wanted some work to do in the first series, so they're approached by director Simon, who is actually the director for the series and the writer as well. He's also playing a fictionalized version of himself who is very kind of feeble and shy and not really a very good writer, but he wants work as well, and he approaches them with an idea to do a play, and basically they accept the offer, but then they come to regret it when they realise how incompetent and useless he is and fall out with him and argue with him, and it ultimately takes Judi Dench to make them see a bit of sense, and that's very funny when she guest stars in it. There's a lot of great guest stars during the series. And then in Series 2 things start to get very self-referential, very meta as it were, because Simon is now making an American adaptation of the first series of Staged without David and Michael, which obviously annoys them. And then in Series 3 things get even more meta when the show collapses after just 2 episodes, and you end up going into this mock behind the scenes documentary about how Series 3 was meant to be filmed. It sounds confusing, but it actually does work pretty well, I think. And it's not just those 3 characters, it's not just David and Michael and Simon. They've all got people with them as well who were in their households with them in the first series. So David's got his wife Georgia Tennant, who is brilliant. I mean, she was good in Doctor Who when she starred as the Doctor's kind of daughter, so to speak. But in this series, she's really funny, and she's one of the producers actually in real life of the series. So yeah, she's got some great one-liners, and her exasperation with kind of David and Michael and Simon, it's just great to witness. She's really funny. And then Michael's got his girlfriend as well, and Simon's got his sister. So you've all got someone in the household with them. And then there's also lots of great guest stars. You know, I've already mentioned Judi Dench, and then there's also people like Samuel L. Jackson, Olivia Colman, and Jim Broadbent, and Jim Parsons Parsons from The Big Bang Theory is in there, and all sorts of other people. They've managed to attract quite a lot of big names to the show, which is really impressive and really makes it fun to watch because you never quite know who's going to pop up. So yeah, there's a lot of great stuff going on in that series. And then in terms of extra stuff, there are outtakes on the Series 1 DVD, but no other extras on the Series 2 and Series 3 discs, which is a shame. There is an outtake at the very end of Series 2, though, over the credits in the final episode. And then on the TV, the BBC broadcast a special episode after Series 3 with outtakes from across the series, and also a couple of special sketches they did as well, outtakes from those. Because they did a comic relief sketch, and they also did a Happy New Year sketch before Series 3. Sadly, they're not on the DVDs either, but they are online, thankfully. So yeah, there's some nice bits of extra material out there. It's just sadly not on the discs. But yeah, I've very much enjoyed going through Staged again. It's really fun, that show. And then finally, to mention a bit of music, because you know I like to mention anything Queen related, of course, as a big fan of theirs. And Brian May has released the third in his series of reissues from his solo career with lots of extra tracks and things like that as he's been doing. And this is a bit more of a rarity because it's called Starfleet, and this is a little project he did back in 1983. He was inspired by his son Jimmy, who enjoyed a Japanese puppet sci-fi show called Starfleet, and he was inspired to do like a rock theme tune for it. And so he thought he'd get some friends together, particularly guitarist Eddie Van Halen and a few other people as well. There's the drummer from REO Speedwagon, for instance, and a couple of session musicians. And they got together in a studio and basically had a jam session for 2 days. And it was never intended to be released for public consumption. It was just a bit of fun that they were doing it. But Brian's friends kind of heard the tracks and said he ought to try and get it out there. And so they managed to get a 3-track EP released of the songs that they put together. And it proved to be quite popular. It got reissued, those tracks, in different forms in the early 90s as well. But even then, I still wasn't aware of it. So it was one of those things that when I became a Queen fan much later and started delving into their solo material eventually, that I kind of became aware of it, and I did hear the tracks online, but that was a long time ago, so I hadn't forgotten their existence, but I'd forgotten, what they sounded like. So it was nice to kind of hear them as if they were new, really, and it made it quite fascinating to listen to those tracks. Starfleet is really catchy, and then you've got a couple of nice blues jams as well. And not only do you get those 3 tracks, though, because this is a deluxe edition, Brian has added a couple of interviews about it that he did at the time with a couple of American presenters, and a few live tracks he did as well, one of which is from the album, along with a couple of versions of Real Rock You. And then he's added on all of the session material that they recorded. There's different takes for the first 2 songs on the album, because the third one was an improvisation anyway, and then various other jams in between as well, and you get to hear all the chatter in the studio and things. So it's really fascinating, not just the main tracks at the start, but even all the different takes. There's a lot of great guitar work in there, and just the way they kind of gel, and the chemistry really comes together. It's really quite interesting to listen to. And yeah, that is it. That is all I have to mention. I told you it'd be short, but I hope you enjoyed that nonetheless. Obviously, I'm going to make up for that when I do my video about August, because I've got a lot planned for this month. I'm to celebrate my 40th birthday. I don't normally make a big deal out of my birthdays, but as it's a big milestone, and it feels like a special year because of the new job I've got as well. And it's just nice to kind of thank my friends for being awesome over the past few years. I'm just going to make a big deal of it and have a lot of fun with people. So, I've got some shows booked, and I've got some dining experiences reserved. I've got a friend coming over to stay for a few days, and I've got another friend who's arranged a surprise, and then I've got a couple of other friends I want to meet up with if our schedules align. So there's going to be plenty going on, and I'm really looking forward to it all. So there'll be a lot to talk about next time. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the summer as well, whatever you get up to. And yeah, that is it really. So until next time, I hope you have fun, as I say. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe as per usual. And I will see you for my next video very soon, when I'll have a lot to talk about. Bye for now.
Là,